Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I'm going to be joined by Troy Strawhecker, who is the Chief Strategy Officer and Partner at JT Logistics. And JT Logistics is focused on food grade warehouses, but maybe not immediately what you think about when it comes to food grade. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And they're very early on in the food supply chain. So we'll talk a little bit about that too as well, and what that means in terms of how they approach designing their warehouses, how they put in processes in place to be able to maintain certain standards, to achieve certifications, license, and things of that nature, to be able to help us with our food supply that we eat as well. So very interested to dive into this because I think they're in kind of a unique position in what they do, and also some of the goods that they have within their warehouses too. So, Troy, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good morning, Kevin. Thanks for having me. I'm doing well.
Definitely happy to get you on. Happy to talk about this. I think it's very interesting what you guys are doing, and what you were telling me a little bit about the background on everything. So, very interested to share this with the audience. But before we kind of dive into some food grade warehousing discussion here, why don't you just give us kind of a brief overview of JT Logistics and tell us a little bit about you guys?
Great. Happy to do it. Thanks for having me. JT Logistics is a sort of a traditional 3PL or third party logistics company. We are based in Des Moines, Iowa, but we have facilities in multiple places. It's probably not fair to say we're nationwide, but we do have facilities in. We have 14 facilities here in Iowa,
Mm.
one in California, two in the Dallas area, one in Tulsa, and then one in Reno, Nevada. And our primary focus is third party logistics. And when I say that, I mean warehousing. We take care
Mhm.
and take great care of other folks' products for them, manage their inventory, and so forth. We also have a division that is our transportation division, where we have asset based trucking. We have some over the road and a fair amount of local shuttles with all of our clients that we have in our main hub, which is Des Moines. And then we have a couple of different divisions that do staffing as well as some value added services like
Mm.
industrial services, quality control, um, the repack, rework, packaging, those sorts of things. So there's two main legs to the stool, and then the third leg is made up of value-added services with regard to
Mm.
helping companies find good people for the roles, as well as packaging and some other items. We're roughly a 30-year-old company, but um, it started out as a company with one warehouse and one truck in Des Moines about
Mm.
30 years ago. That company sold to a company that my now partner, Jamie Cord, he's the J, I'm the T. Um, uh,
Oh, okay.
yeah, so he went to work for another organization after he left the Jacobson companies. I'm not sure if anybody's ever mentioned Jacobson on any of your multi-hundred podcasts, but it was a Des
I
Moines
don't think
based
so.
it was a Des Moines based 3PL that is now known as
Mm.
XPO, or at least XPO bought them.
Mm.
And so Dick Jacobson was a Des Moines guy. At the time they sold, it was the third largest third party logistics company with um, over 140 warehouses, tens of thousands of employees, and just a lot of good people. That sold to a one organization that immediately sold to XPO. So most of your listeners might know it as XPO. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
logistics DNA in the Des Moines area, and a lot of my coworkers and my partners used to work for Mr. Jacobson, and I think learned a lot of good things about the third party logistics business, and also how to be good citizens and contributing to society through philanthropy. So. That's a little bit about us. About 5 years ago, we changed our name. When I came into the picture along with Jamie, I helped him buy out his partner's, and
Mm.
we had um, four warehouses and about 42 teammates at the time, and that was in 2021. And since that time, we've grown to 22 warehouses, and proud to say we have over 700 great people working for us
Nice.
now, doing a lot of good things. So that's sort of the snippet of JT Logistics.
Interesting there. Yeah, yeah. An interesting history as well, and obviously a big footprint there, especially in the Iowa area, which I think is interesting as well. So tell us a little bit about kind of what your focus is, because I think you're in an interesting
Sure.
part, and you're focused on food in a sense. But tell us a little bit about exactly kind of what your ideal client is and who you're servicing.
Right. Happy to do that. So, in the warehousing segment of our business, in the 21 warehouses that we're conducting business, I think it's fair to say about 14 of them are focused on some part of the food supply chain, which then leads to the food grade. In I'll touch on this for just a moment because we aren't just a food
Mm,
grade warehousing company, although it's something that we pride ourselves on being in the sort of the breadbasket of America, the heartland of America with regard to the basis of food supply, with regard to corn, milo, soybeans, all these things that are fundamental building blocks to the food supply chain, whether people know that or not. A lot of their
mhm,
artificial sweeteners come from, corn syrup. There's obviously
mm,
ethanol that helps provide some fuel. There's a lot of parts of being in the Midwest that just by default has us there. But in Reno, Nevada, we have a warehouse that's 335,000 square feet with over 80 associates doing e-commerce fulfillment for a large do-it-yourself retail home company, Lowe's
mm.
Corporation. We're proud to be partners with them. So it has nothing to do with food. And then in
Okay.
California, we have a 600,000 square foot facility with over 240 associates that are doing store fulfillment and inbounds from overseas shipments for a really great Japanese chain called Daiso.
Mm,
Daiso is a retailer. And we also have a facility for them in Dallas that's over 200,000 square feet, fulfilling their southern stores. They have about 100 stores in the US with plans of doing about 1,000. So we do their store fulfillment and inbounding for them. Then we also have a couple of pharmaceutical grade clients that do have something to do with temperature control that technically gets into some food grade certifications, Kevin.
mhm,
And then in Iowa, which is where most of our food grade things take place, of the 14 warehouses we have here, some of them have part of the food supply chain in the sense that we have John Deere as a client storing some of their parts for harvesting or spraying and whatnot.
mm,
Certainly, those warehouses don't need to be food grade, and those are about 11 of our warehouse, or pardon me, 3 of our warehouses. Then the 11 are all certified food grade and do various things in the food supply chain. And some of our food supply customers, Kevin, you and I were talking offline about what people hear when they hear
yeah.
food grade. And all of us are consumers. So most of us probably start at that. If we don't have the experience of being in a food grade warehouse, we all certainly have experience of eating food or shopping for food. Some of
Yes.
some of us
Yeah.
some of us more than others. I could probably ease up on that. But most of our food supply customers, our food chain customers, are at the front end of the food supply chain with fundamental basic ingredients that get into the food supply chain. And that's what we've focused,
Mm,
whether it be lysine, a protein derivative, seed corn, parent corn. Um, we have a large spice customer where we do
mm.
some repacking for them for some things that end up in retail brands that your clients and listeners would have heard of that they could buy off the shelf at major grocers and kind of everything in between. So when we say food grade, it's really more towards the front end of the food supply chain, Kevin.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a very interesting position to be in. And obviously it sounds like, you guys touch a little bit of everything, across your various facilities there. But, tell us on the food grade side. And I think it's interesting you made that distinction there too, where, you said food grade, maybe typically somebody would think that it's refrigerated or frozen. But you're in the beginning of the food supply chain, as you mentioned, with a lot of these kind of ingredients or spices, as you mentioned there, which I think is really interesting. So tell us a little bit about, for maybe people that are not familiar. I mean, what's the distinction between a food grade warehouse versus just a regular warehouse
Yeah.
where, like, for example, you're saying they're doing e-commerce fulfillment?
Yeah, great question. I would say at the fundamental basic level, Kevin, at least in the states that we deal with, there is a state certification that you have to go through to be certified food grade. And at
Mm,
that, what I would say, and this is nothing against the states, every state is a little bit different and there's a different level of, you know, rigorousness, so to speak, to that certification. But in Iowa, probably like a lot of states, they take it very seriously. It's a regulated department, regulated by the state. And so you have to apply for a food grade certificate. And what that means is you are going to have your warehouse inspected by a state regulator. You apply for this food grade certification. I also think it's important to recognize that if you have multiple warehouses, you have to have a certificate per warehouse. You can't just get food grade certified in one and apply that across your chain. You can certainly apply those principles and things
mm,
that you do, but when we apply for a food grade certificate, it's at that facility and it gets visited by a state regulator, audited, and either you get it or you don't. If you don't, they show you where you fell short, and then you have an opportunity to make up for it. But at a basic level, they're making sure that the building is secure, that there's
mhm,
no pest uh, infestations. And so there's a need for a regulated and regular pest control system. We need to make sure that any fenestration, like any opening in the building, whether it be a person door or a dock delivery door, is sealed at the bottom of the doors. All those sorts of things are kind of the basic fundamental blocks of being able to say that you have a food grade certification. Also, there needs to be shatterproof lighting so that particles of broken potential glass can't fall
mm,
into things that get into the food supply chain. There's a minimum, at least in Iowa, to be 18 inches off of every perimeter wall with your
okay,
goods or racking, so that it can be monitored and looked at, so things can't have a place to hide. I know these sound like very basic
yeah,
things, Kevin, but
mhm,
it's a very basic thing to keep warehouses food grade. You have to keep
mm,
pests out. You have to keep them clean. You have to have the floors swept. You have to have proper lighting, but the lighting has to be, non-glass, non-breakable.
mm,
Um, and those are kind of the fundamental things to be able to have a food grade certification. On
mm,
top of all the other regulatory things with regard to
yeah,
ingress, egress, handicap access, all those sorts of things, those have nothing to do with food grade. They just have everything to do with occupancy. This is on top of that.
right. Yeah. Interesting there. And yeah, I think that's, it makes sense. Obviously, we don't want pests and things like that getting into our food supply, especially at the beginning, right? And then make it all the way through. That wouldn't be too good.
Right.
But what about from like a construction or design process? I mean,
Sure.
can you take just a regular warehouse? Can you make it food grade, or does it have to be from the beginning as this building is being developed? It needs to be set out to be food grade.
Sure. When you ask that question, I think about it sort of in two ways. One way, your listeners probably want to learn, like, what could I do to become food grade, or what are other people
Yeah.
doing with regard to food grade? The other way that I listen to it is, again, everybody here is a consumer. Please tell me you're not going to share some information that makes me feel less safe about the nation's food supply or anything that kind of gets into it. So I'll answer it kind of
Yeah.
from both perspectives, if that makes sense, Kevin. From a construction standpoint, what can you do or not do? I will tell all the listeners out there that we have, most of our facilities are reasonably new because, as I mentioned, we've had this growth, in the last 5 years. At the time we were growing, there weren't a lot of available warehouses. So we did set out to
Mhm,
find or build newer warehouses. So it is fair to say, just by chance, that the majority of our warehouses have been constructed in the last 5 years. And
mhm,
because of that, they are typically concrete, tilt up, flat roof with a great R value on the roof. What I mean by that is the energy efficiency and all that
mhm,
is quite high. It's a very tight concrete building, typically 32 feet clear height, typically two drive-in doors. Typically, our average square footage of a warehouse, which could vary for a lot of folks, is about 340,000 square feet. That average is obviously made up of some smaller ones and a couple of larger ones, but just say 300,000 square feet. You're going to have about 22 to 30 dock doors that are standard dock doors, two drive-up doors, and you want to make sure all those dock packages and things are don't cheap out on those, would be my advice to the folks out there. Certainly, you might be able to pass a food grade certification, but the more that they wear out, and they do come with semi-annual and annual visits, make sure that you're getting the appropriate dock packages and gear to stand the test of whatever your particular utilization is going to be. Because if there's any daylight coming into
mhm.
that building, you're going to rightfully fail. So you just
Okay.
can't fail. So old buildings can be brought up tight too, Kevin. We have a building that was built
Mhm.
probably in 1979 that is not a
Okay.
concrete tilt-up building. It's a metal building, and frankly, some of the bottoms of the metal siding had kind of come out with some erosion and whatnot. So we came in and repaired those. It was not easy. It wasn't crazy hard, but it was probably a better
Mhm.
solution than tearing the building down and building a new one. We didn't need the clear height of 32 in that particular building, this one was about 19 feet because it was a little bit older building. But we've had
Okay.
a couple metal buildings that have passed food grade inspection. So there's no real uh, minimum standard with regard to the construction materials, but there
Mm.
are 100% minimums to daylight coming in, the seals on the doors, pest control, all of those sorts of things. Does that answer your question on the construction?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, I was curious on the fact that, can you take, and I think you just said in that example from the building from 1979, I mean, can you take a, older building, existing space and, make it food grade and suitable to be able to do what you're doing? And it sounds like you can do that. So very interesting there and a great explanation on that as well. So now tell us a little bit about, because you mentioned there a couple times the certifications, licenses, and, those may vary from state to state, as you mentioned there. But tell us a little bit about kind of what goes into, for example, you go into a new building that you've built or this existing building that you just talked about as well. How do you start to put in infrastructure in place around the processes and what people need to do to be able to maintain that food grade level? And you mentioned there, if they come in and they fail, they give you an opportunity to improve upon that. But how do you make sure as you move into that building that you're off to the right start and you've put in these kind of repeatable processes to continue to allow this compliance to be in place?
Yep, great question. I would say first and foremost, it's it's client driven. Every client has maybe different needs, but at a minimum, every 3PL probably has to have some set of standards that no matter what clients come our way, you're going to get a base package of X. And at
Mm,
JT Logistics, we are ISO certified in a facility, and those audits, those quality standards, those processes, the desire to have leaders that have gone through Six Sigma or some measure of Kaizen, constant improvement really does help. But at a minimum, we have a quality control team, we have a safety team, we have an information and technology department, which helps us with our badge access, security, cameras, and whatnot. So at
mm,
a minimum, when JT Logistics is going to a new facility, whether it's new, meaning brand new, or new to
yeah.
us, if we're taking over, second or third generation space, the first thing that we do is go in and make sure it's tip top clean before we take any occupancy. We have our quality team go in and make sure, along with our facilities management team, make sure that all the dock doors are either sealed or on their way to being sealed, all the people doors, everything, so that it can have the chance of being food grade, whether it's going to or not. We just assume
Mm,
that we're going to have a client at some point that needs to be food grade. So we send in the
interesting.
quality team to do those inspections, the safety team. And why would the safety team go in? Well, if there's racking, as an example, in the
Mm,
space, we want to make sure it's been inspected to make sure that it doesn't have any structural integrity issues, those sorts of things. But typically, we're going into an empty big box building. So we send
mm,
in facilities control and quality to make sure that that's tip top. And then our security and our IT teams go in and make sure they have all the low voltage wiring. We have a division called Wareboss that gets our warehouses just at a minimum ready to go with badge access at every door, the ability to have connectivity with our WMS system, which may vary from location to location based upon our client, and that we have a minimum of security cameras, both on the dock, in the truck yard, as well as at all the entrances for safety for people. And then there are minimum standards we have, Kevin, about 60 feet in on the interior for staging, where we put in cameras
mm,
at a minimum just to make sure that we have the ability to monitor anything. And then there are some clients that need more cameras for
mm.
their own uh, purposes, but that's, I guess, the minimum. And then let's just tell a story about what about above the minimum. So if we're going to be
Sure.
food grade, we then have our facilities and our operations team apply to the state for a food grade certificate. Again, there are some listeners out there saying, "Man, state certificates such a minimum thing," and they're probably right. There
Mm,
are SQF initiatives, which is the Safe Quality Food. There's FDA. There's the Global Food Safety Initiative, the GFSI. There's NSF International. There's a lot of different certifications that are out there, but for us, the state is the minimum. We do
mm.
have a client that needed us to do SQF, so we went through that. That's probably a whole other podcast, but it's the Safe
Yeah.
Quality Food Initiative. So it's a fairly strenuous set of minimum standards that if you are ISO certified, if you are, um, caring about a lot of basic things, it's not that hard to pass the test. But if you're deficient in those areas, it'll be very hard to pass it. So, which client would we need for that? Well, we have a spice client that
Mm,
has us not touching raw food, Kevin, but
mhm.
repackaging prepackaged spices that are going to like uh, a superstore or a warehouse club.
Okay.
We're taking their prepackaged spices and then repackaging them into gift sets of 3 or 12 or what have you. So we're
Mm,
certainly touching a container that has food in it, but we're not touching the raw materials. But even in that
yeah.
example, there are some pretty big standards. That same client has some initiatives where we have a clean room that
Mm,
has very strenuous standards, tantamount to an operating room that everybody's maybe watched Chicago whatever ER or the ER television
yeah.
shows where people are
Mhm,
scrubbing in. For the listeners wondering about their food supply chain, it's not different. We have
mm,
safety measures. You have to put on footies, gloves, hair nets, all those sorts of things. There's wash stations, and all they're really doing is not touching the food with their bare hands, but they are taking like bay leaves, cinnamon
mm.
sticks, those sorts of things, and packaging them for this spice company. And it's on camera, it's monitored.
Okay.
They have to wash in, wash out. So that would be an example of where the warehouse is food
Mhm.
grade certified. The clean room is measured by a whole different set of standards and constant up for constant weekly spot checks and review. It's on camera. There's login sheets and all those sorts of things.
Mm. Very interesting, and definitely a lot of steps there, and obviously it's great to hear too. About how our food is being handled, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I think it's interesting there because there's a lot of things to take into account for, and I'm sure it's it seems like there's a lot more steps to have to do those things properly versus, say, you mentioned the facility you have in Reno, right, where you're just doing like e-commerce fulfillment, right?
Right.
So
Right.
how does the from a staff perspective, like those workers that are doing that repackaging or they're handling these food grade products in those facilities, how do you ensure that you have them trained properly, and what does a training program look like for those robust processes?
Yeah. Great question. Thanks for asking.
Mm,
I would say one common theme is we've tried very, very hard here at JT, probably like a lot of your listeners, to invest in proper technology to allow
mm,
for our teammates to be successful at what they do. The reason I bring up technology at this juncture is our various warehouse management systems, or WMS systems, are really critical in helping every step along the way get measured, make sure things aren't missed. We also have a lot of people, very valued teammates, where English is not their first language. So there becomes a component
mm,
of signage, multilingual training, and so forth. So if your question about training was relative to the food grade operations, Kevin, I'll answer it that way. Um,
yes, yeah.
yeah. So, first of all, our quality team does a download from our client, ensuring that everything that we think we need to do based upon the scope of work, there's like a scope of work document that is discussed between the client and us, that they
Mm,
come in and show us exactly what they need done. And in some cases, even take us to the place where it's being done or about to not be done because they're either closing a facility. Now, if they're leaving a competitor of ours and coming to us, that gets a little trickier. They
a
might
little
show us
tricky, yeah,
some
yeah.
videos, but it starts with client interaction with our quality team.
Mm,
And we have a person who leads our quality team who she's worn a lot of different hats here. She also happens to be multilingual. So she's wonderfully talented, but she's such a
mm,
stickler for, she's a process driven person. So our quality team happens to be led by a person who's built that way. She can't
mm,
not have stuff fall through the cracks. And her associates on her team go meet with the client along with operations and just watch and learn and observe. Then we look at our scope of work document and ensure that what we're interpreting is what the client wants. Then we do time studies to make sure that when we're trying to price these things, now price isn't the most important thing because we're talking about safety and quality, but when we price things, we want to make sure that we're doing a time study for the repackaging or for whatever they might need us to be done. We want to make sure that there's no corners being cut, that there's no step being skipped because of an assumption. So there's
mm,
multiple interactions with the customer, and then we do some dry runs. Then we put it into practice. have the client watch either live or on a video, and then we're good to go and they see the results. And so the training part then is after listening to the client during that time frame, there's some team leads in that process listening, and
Mm,
then they go through and cross train, and then we have signs and placards on walls. We have some I want to almost like computer monitors, almost like television monitors at different parts of different warehouses, showing key performance indicators or minimum quality standards to ensure that they're doing everything. There's just constant reminders. So training up front directly from the client,
mm,
reinforcement from quality and operations on a daily basis, and then on an hourly basis, having video monitors and whatnot, sort of encouraging them to follow all the steps and just probably like any process, making sure the results are there, and if not, going in and seek to find out why not.
mm. Interesting. Yeah, yeah, and very involved process, and I love that you mentioned the head of quality there is built for that, right? And I think as someone that has worked in inventory control and some quality in their career, I mean, you definitely there's a certain mindset and personality that fits
Yeah.
in those types of roles, and I think that's really important to be able to drive that and have that consistency throughout. So, I mean, very robust there and very interesting. So I'm curious. You mentioned the technology a little bit there, and you mentioned the level of cameras in a sense too for various requirements for clients and tracking things. I mean, what types of technologies are you utilizing to help make this kind of compliance and tracking and traceability of these goods, which are very very critical for not just the clients but the customers too, who are going to need to eat, as we mentioned earlier in the conversation. What kind of technologies are you using to kind of help make this easier? What's interesting to you that you're seeing in the market right now around technology?
We're all in the technology game, whether we want to believe it or not. We value
Yeah.
our IT department very much. There's a lot of interactivity between really all of our functions, but technology is one of those ones that touches every department. We set out to get a new and a better fit for us WMS about 2 years ago. We
Mm,
employed a consultant, very valued consultant. St. Ange was the group that we chose.
okay.
They helped us in our search, and we landed upon Datex. Probably won't spend a lot of time on the different WMS systems that we've been on because, for
Mm,
various reasons, they were great for us. We wanted to have a multi-location, single platform as best we could with some different iterations. So Datex is the one that we are in the process of moving towards. Just like our old WMS, it does have lot tracing ability, SKU tracing ability, all those sorts of things. If there happens to be a recall, you've got to make sure that your system can understand exactly where that individual piece of inventory came from. If there's ever
mm,
an allergen question, or if there's ever a recall, or ever anything to be traced, we have to have that traceability. It's critically important. And Datex, like a lot of your probably listeners, technology companies has that. So that's the WMS that we're moving towards. We also have interactivity with some of the large ones, like four of our largest clients are on SAP. So are
okay.
we,
Mm,
to help manage that. But with regard to the food grade, I think you'll see Datex be our main um, WMS system. And then security and technology cameras. Verkada is a system that we have chosen to go with for right, wrong, or indifferent. We love them.
mm,
In simple form, it's very user friendly. Our tech department thinks it's the gold standard, and I think I would agree with them. Um, it's just nice to have very easy to use camera technology if there's ever any question about something. And then, frankly, we do use technology that isn't crazy sexy, but for the trucking industry, maybe it is, or for the
mm,
receiving industry, every one of our dock handlers has an iPad where we take a photo of the inbound and then the outbound, just to ensure
mm,
quality, make sure that the load locks are in place. If there needs to be Tyvek or some sort of, if it's going overseas, we do send food overseas. We do send some
yeah.
um, agricultural products overseas that are a part of the food chain. There are some container sealing steps that we need to take, and so it's not so much a CYA activity, although it sort of is. It's just an ensuring, like, hey, here's a snapshot, and it ties directly into our WMS. Right when they take that photo, it ties into the receiving or on the outbound shipment. Again, just ensuring that all the steps that we were asked to take we did, and here's some
mm,
either photographic or video evidence of such, so that they can have all the uh, um, comfort in the world that we followed all the steps, and then if we didn't, there's evidence of it. Does that
mm.
answer part of your question with regard to technology,
Yeah.
both security and WMS?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, and I think it covers too, like how you guys are tracking that traceability of
Mhm.
the goods and the inventory itself, and I think it's very interesting too. And I love the capture there on the outbound inbound side, and I think that makes a lot of sense to do. And now tell us too, because you mentioned a couple times security as
Mhm.
well, right? And people might be thinking like, oh, spices, like
Yeah.
why so much security, right? But you have some interesting products or food supplies that you have in there that I think need to be highly secured. So tell us a little bit about that and how that works.
Certainly. I would say the most intense security that we've had was we had a lot of very high value products for the construction or redirection of data centers. Iowa also happens to be one of the
Mm,
largest data center locations in the country. In fact, I think Meta's Facebook campus here in Des Moines is their second largest in the world. And there's a variety of reasons for that.
oh, really?
We have a fair amount of land.
Yeah.
Our state put into to place some incentives about 15 years ago with regard to taxation or lack thereof on some racking and electricity. We have
Mm,
an abundance of electricity supply. So for a variety of reasons, there's a lot of data centers here, and a lot of the equipment that goes in data centers is very high value. And so for those reasons, there's a whole set of security protocols that we got really good at really quickly. But it also transitioned into when we got into some more intricate storage requests from companies that are at the very basis and the bedrock of our food supply chain.
mm,
It can be a national security issue. I mean, the parent seed corn, like the corn, we have strands of corn that our
mm,
customers have trusted us with to, and this is where the security comes in, to make hybrid corn and different sorts of things for the nation's food supply, or to be able to create hybrid corn to grow, or soybeans or other products to grow in different parts of the world with different irrigation limitations, different levels of saline in the air, all those sorts of things. There's different strands, like 1942 parent seed corn to the 70s. There's all this different stuff, and they that needs to be secure. Believe it or
mm.
not, like who's going to come and rob a warehouse of some corn? Well, you might be surprised.
Yeah.
But it's really also about making sure that the temperature parameters that they put on us are maintained, the humidity parameters
Mm,
are maintained, so that this corn doesn't get into like a geranium vibe where it's like a humidity box in a warehouse, which could easily happen,
mm,
and
mm,
have that seed start to germinate. So its security isn't just about preventing theft; it's also about
mm,
making sure that all the protocols and minimums are being met for the client. So
mm,
yeah, so our food grade clients, the majority of them aren't the spice ones, although they're very valuable and helpful to us. It's the corn and soybeans and all these things that are just pallets, and I mean tens of thousands of pallets of this stuff that eventually gets into the food supply
mm.
chain for in a variety of ways.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, yeah. I was gonna ask you like how is it stored, but it sounds like there's a ton. I was kind of like envisioning, a room with a bunch of lasers going across and
Yeah,
like
it's not quite like that. I didn't mean to be
one
that
one
dramatic.
like kernel
Yeah,
kernel of corn on a pedestal or something like that.
Catherine
But
Catherine Zeta-Jones doing like gymnastics
yeah,
moves to get to the keypad.
yeah, exactly what I was picturing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not that sexy, but it is
yeah,
like
interesting.
the real point is it's more than someone would think,
Mm,
but certainly less than that the Catherine
yeah,
Zeta-Jones movie. But yeah, and we do rack most of our warehouses because warehouses, irrespective of where you are, I know Iowa warehouses are fairly inexpensive compared to the rest of the country.
mm,
Um, but they're certainly not cheap. I mean, I think our average warehouse new construction is probably $32 million, which is a fair amount of money. And
yeah,
so that you really got to go up. The 32-foot clear. You
mm,
got to have racking for these products to be able to go up to be able to offer all these services we offer at a competitive price for our customers, so that they can offer competitive pricing to their customers. So
mm.
racking becomes really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting, interesting stuff, and very interesting to hear about your business and the food grade side of it, and also the variety of things that you guys do as well. So really interesting to learn from you here, Troy, and really appreciate you coming on the show today and giving us a little lesson here on food grade warehousing and teaching us a little bit about what you do over at JT Logistics as well. So if people are interested in getting in touch or learning more about JT Logistics, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. So the best way to get in touch with us or find us is, we're on the internet at www.jtlogistics.com. My kids would say I just aged myself by throwing the www in front of it. And then, we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, but the internet's probably the best way to find us at jtlogistics.com. I would also say thank you for having us on. I think a lot of your listeners are going to learn that, food grade may be a multi um, podcast opportunity for you, Kevin, because there are people that
Yeah.
do far more intricate things with us with regard to organic and animal welfare approved, biodynamics. There's a lot of things that we don't do, but I'm sure that
Mm,
there's some very talented and capable 3PLs that are on more of the consumer end of the supply chain that have a lot of certifications that we haven't had to do yet based upon our client base. But I guess the message I would send is, rest assured that our clients take food grade very seriously, even if it's in a basic seed form, before it goes through two or three steps to become things that people ingest.
mm.
And we're in that front end of that right here in the heartland. And I just appreciate being on the show and sharing a little bit about our small part of the world.
Definitely, absolutely. We appreciate you coming on and sharing as well, and super interesting to learn about this part of the food supply chain too. I think it's really interesting to see the origins of what we pull out of the cupboard every day, right? And that sort of thing. So really appreciate you coming on, and we'll definitely put the link to the website at thenewwarehouse.com as well, and in the show notes here, so people can easily find it and get in touch with you guys. So Troy, really appreciate you coming on, and thanks for your time today.
Kevin, appreciate it. Happy holidays.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesAreSexy.com and get your own.